Welcome to today's webinar. This is the webinar as part of the CSE Development in Action webinar series. My name is Evangeline and I'm the Alumni Engagement Officer. And I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar with the title, Who Bears the Cost of Our Clothes? Circular Economy and Textile Waste in Ghana. This webinar will address the CSE development theme, promoting innovation and entrepreneurship. And I'm pleased to invite our presenter today, who is Commonwealth Alumnus Judith Akoto, sorry. Judith will draw on her research and field insights to reveal how Ghana's textile and fashion sector is applying circular economy principles to address textile waste. It's going to be a very interesting topic, loads of insights. So please do keep your questions ready for Judith, who will kindly address these questions in the Q&A session. I would also like to let you know that Judith is a 2024 Commonwealth Shared Scholar from Ghana. She completed her master's in sustainability, energy, and development at Durham University. Judith, over to you to present your webinar topic, to give a brief overview of the webinar, and of course, introduce yourself.
All right, thank you, Eva. And hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, from wherever you are. Um, so it's a pleasure to be here and to be able to give back in my own little way, uh, after my scholarship, which ended about 6 months ago. So from today, my goal is not to so much dump information on people. There's so much information, but then to be able to make this as relatable as it can be for every participant as much as I can. So I've tried my possible best to break it down, so that we can get something from it. But then as a form of an overview, and also I just wanted to put this in briefly. If you're doing work in relation to this, the fashion industry, especially post-consumer waste aspect of it and the responsibility. That will be great. It will be great to connect with you on LinkedIn and to be able to check how we can find synergies in our work and then also some sort of partnership or collaboration. But as a form of overview, I'll be starting with an overview of what the global fashion system industry looks like at the moment. Um, the growing problem of textile waste. And then I narrowed down to Ghana as a case study and what are some of the secular responses currently emerging or have existed from communities. So I'll do it in two parts, so more of like the informal ones happening in communities as well as what institutions are doing. And then we dive into the Q&A. So, but then before we talk about all of that, I want us to reflect on our own relationship with clothing. And I want to ask, there's a poll question. How many items of clothing have you purchased in the last 3 months? In the first quarter, in the first quarter. The first quarter is nearly ended. How many pieces of clothing have you bought? Have you kept a record of that? And I want us to just put in your answer in the poll so that we have a fair idea of what it looks like for the audience today. No, I think this is the wrong poll. This is sort of, I think this is the
Yes,
second poll
yes, I
question. Yeah.
realized I'm trying to bring in the first full question.
Okay.
Bear with me.
Okay.
All right, let's see. No?
I'm still seeing who bears the cost. I'm still
Yeah,
seeing the second one. Okay.
yep, yep,
All right. I think we have that
works.
now. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, response is coming through. Maybe a few more seconds.
Yeah.
All right, should we end the poll?
Yeah, I think we can. Let's just see.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's quite interesting. So we have quite a number of people by at least I'll leave it between 1 to 5. We have more. Okay. So which stop sharing?
Yeah.
Okay. So and the second question will be more like just more of a reflective one on how many of these do you expect to still be wearing from a year from now? Because sometimes we buy clothes and we don't really tend to think of the long-term plan for it. But just as a reflective question, ask yourself, if I've bought 5 clothes, or if I've bought more than 10 pieces of clothing, or if I'm not even sure of how many clothing I'm buying, all these pieces of clothing, how many of them do you think you'll be wearing a year from now? So these everyday decisions may seem small, but collectively they are part of a much larger and bigger problem we currently facing. Can I go back to the presentation? I want to go back to the presentation, but it seems
Would you be able to share your screen again? I've stopped the poll
yeah.
question. Yeah. No?
All right.
Yeah, perfect.
You see
Thank
my
you.
screen now? Okay,
Yes, yes.
great. So what does the global fashion system looks like? The fashion industry today produces around 100 billion garments, 100 billion garments, which is massive. And this is every year. Over the past 2 decades, production has doubled, and this is mainly between the year 2000 and the year 2020. While the amount of time we wear clothes have decreased significantly. In fact, there are some studies that have shown that garments are worn around 36% fewer times than they were 15 years ago. So what we're saying is not just, more clothing being produced, but we're also seeing clothing being used for shorter periods of time. And this is often hinged back on what kind of model the fashion industry uses, what kind of business model it uses. So the fashion system largely follows a linear model, and we take resources, we make garments, we use them briefly, and then we discard them. That is primarily the system it runs on at the moment. And the system is the system is sufficient for production, but highly insufficient for the environment. So this system is has led to what the problem in terms of what the waste is. And just to give a brief overview of what the global waste looks like at the moment. So the fashion industry is currently producing approximately 92 million tons of textile waste annually. And but then to put this in perspective, less than 1% of clothing we wear, or the used clothing, is recycled into new clothes. And this is because of the mixed fiber in terms of the makeup of the clothing. We're having a lot of mixed fibers, so cotton mixed with synthetic fiber. So it's hard to recycle clothing that have So technologies now are not able to recycle pieces of clothing that have mixed fibers. So until we are able to develop technologies that are able to do that, it will be harder. It's still hard to recycle clothing. So unless it's made up of one fiber, let's say if you're handling, it's easier to handle purely clothes made purely with cotton. It's easier to recycle them than to have cotton with synthetic fibers, if that makes sense. And we have roughly about 73% of clothing ended up as waste in landfills and also being incinerated. We have about 12% being downcycled to lower products value, lower products like rags, mops, used in various. We've seen people using it in for bricks and all of that. So we have quite a number of that as well. But then just to give you a bit of perspective, it's known that every second, the equivalent of a truckload of clothing is either burned or sent to landfill. Every second, not every hour or every minute, every second. So we're producing about 92 million tons of textile waste is currently equivalent to about between 40 to 60 billion pieces of clothing. And if we're producing, just think it through, if you're producing about 100 billion and almost 60 billion is going to waste, then it gives you an overview of the massiveness of what the waste is like. I thought of adding this because just to give an overview of what the United Nations Environment Program, to be specific, the textile initiative that I've been doing some work with. So according to the United Nations Environment Program, unsustainable fashion contributes to what is known as the triple planetary crisis, and which is the climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and the pollution and waste. So if we take climate change, the fashion industry is highly energy intensive. So from raw material extraction to manufacturing and global transportation, we have synthetic fibers like polyester that are also derived from fossil fuels, which further increases emission. And there's this professor of fashion, I know she comes to class and then she's like, who is wearing oil today? Meaning who is wearing synthetic fiber of clothing. So we have a lot, I'll come to that later, but then when we look at the biodiversity loss, fashion production often relies on, land intensive processes such as cotton farming, which can degrade the soil and the ecosystem as well. In addition, chemicals used in dyeing and finishing textiles frequently enter waterways, affecting plant and animal life. And then when we look at the pollution, the waste aspect, which is where much of today's conversation sits, it's the industry generates vast amounts of textile waste while also contributing to microplastic pollution through synthetic fibers. So what we begin to see is that the fashion is not just, cultural, it's not just economic, it's not just an economic industry, but it is deeply connected to some of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time. But to move on to fashion contributing to plastic pollution, because fashion contributes to plastic pollution, and even ocean, I didn't even include that, but then I'll talk about it regardless. So many garments today are made from synthetic fibers, and fibers like polyester are derived from fossil fuel. And we have up to about 60% of clothing today containing synthetic fibers and textiles. And they contribute to about 11% of global plastic waste. So this means that many of the clothes we wear are not just fabric. They are also a part of the global plastic waste we're trying to solve as well. But then what happens to clothes when we donate? Because there have been so many conversations around the fact that donating clothes is what helps solve the problem. And many of us try to respond to this problem by donating clothes, especially people in the global north. And it feels like a responsible thing to do, giving clothes a second life rather than, throwing them away. And it makes sense. But then in many cases, yes, but donation can extend the life of the clothing. But the reality is that the volume of clothing being donated today far exceeds the local systems that absorb them. And as a result, a large share of donated clothing enters the global second-hand trade, which I'll come to later, where garments are sorted, they are bundled and exported across borders in Europe, in UK, in China, and then it gets into different global south countries. And this is where the story begins globally, because for the average consumer in the global north, the journey of their clothing often ends at donation point. And what happens after that is largely invisible. There is very little awareness of where these clothes go, how they are handled, or what happens when they cannot be reused. And that is the situation because I conducted during my time and my studies, there was a module where we were supposed to conduct a field study within the campus itself. So it was sort of like a mini field study, research sort of. And I wanted to be able to understand the consumer behavior of the average clothing consumer on campus, and what we came about the results show that the average consumer in the global north, even on the campus, people who were studying, people who were in school, did not know where the clothes end. They don't know, beyond giving it to charities, beyond giving it to recycling companies, they don't know where it ends. They don't know what consequences buying 50 clothes in a year costs people living somewhere in the global south. So that lack of awareness when it comes to even the consumer in the global north is a challenge, a part of the challenge we're trying to, bring light and awareness on. So in many cases, the environmental impacts, whether it is waste accumulation, pollution, or pressure on the local systems, do not show up in the communities where the clothes originally purchased. We don't see clothes at the beaches in the global north. We don't see it in London, or you wouldn't see it somewhere in the United States. Maybe there are some communities, yes, but then the major cities where a lot of these clothes are bought and purchased. So they show up in places far removed from the point of consumption. And that's the reality. So while donation can be a part of the solution, it does not address the underlying issue and the problem of overproduction and overconsumption. And it often shifts the burden to managing waste to other parts of the world. So the burden is shifted beyond their region. So we often see, global north, you normally see adverts like, donate clothes, do good, you're saving the planet, you're saving the earth, we're going to give it to poor people in Africa. Those are the kind of adverts you get when if you've I know a number of you would agree with me on this, but then the reality of what it is these clothes arrive in bales in places like Kantamanto Market in Ghana, and in other African countries, and a significant portion of these clothing and bills are just waste being transported across the border into the global south. So let me talk a bit about the Ghana and the global secondhand trade, because Ghana is one of the leading countries that imports a lot of secondhand clothes. And Ghana is one of the largest importers of secondhand clothes in West Africa, making it a key node in the global used clothing trade. So each week, it's estimated at around 15 million pieces of garments arrive in the country, and many of them up to about 70% pass through Accra's Kantamanto market. So these clothes come primarily from Europe, North America, and increasingly from other parts of the world like China, reflecting how interconnected a fashion system has become. And once they arrive, the garments are, they arrive in compressed bales and distributed through the markets. And from Accra market, it goes to other markets in places in other regions in the country as well. So we have these bales contain hundreds of items, often stored by category, like jeans, shirts, or dresses. Sometimes it's summer clothes or shoes or sandals, but not necessarily by quality. And traders purchase them upfront without knowing exactly what is inside. So it's just sort of like you have to be able to be lucky enough to get a bundle or a bill that has quality items. And what this creates is a dynamic, but also it creates a risk system where clothing moves rapidly from global supply chains into local economies. And on one hand, the trade supports, thousands of livelihoods. There I had a conversation yesterday, and from the Secondhand Clothing Trade Association, the General Secretary said there are over 2 million people involved in the secondhand clothing trade. So, and a lot of these people have been in this trade for generations. And he himself, who was even talking about this, is a second generation because his father was involved in the trade and he has taken it on. And his son is also taking it on. So it's sort of like the generational thing that has supported so many livelihoods. And it's affordable clothing for many people in the country. The statistics show that more than 90% of Ghanaians wear secondhand clothes. But also on the other hand, is where we see significant challenges, particularly when the volume and the quality of garments exceed what the market can realistically absorb. And where we also see declining quality due to fast fashion. So these are some of the challenges that sit side by side. So the trade is helping solve a problem, but it is also causing environmental problems on the other side of it. So Kantamanto is at the center of the system and is one of the largest second-hand, currently known as the largest second-hand clothing market in West Africa. It is not just a marketplace, it's a whole complex and an ecosystem, and has over 30,000 people working within the market, including traders, tailors, head porters called the KIAs, the sorters, the upcyclers, and so many people work in this market. And for many, this market is not just a place of business, but primarily source of livelihood and economic survival. So everyday bales of clothing arrive and are distributed across the market. Traders purchase these bales upfront, often investing significant amount. I think it's about between $200 and $300 per bale. And most of them don't know, like I mentioned, exactly what is inside. While the bales may be labeled by type, but they don't know in terms of the quality. And when the clothing is of good quality, traders are able to sort and do like sell them when there are certain parts torn. We see traders trying to repair, sew certain things back, and then put it back on the market. But when they are damaged and outdated, they're stained or completely not sellable, the traders bear this loss. And there is no refund, there's no guarantee, and there's no safety net to absorb all these risks and all these losses. So this creates a system where risk is concentrated at the level of the trader, even though the clothing originates from a global supply chain. And so Continental is quite a unique intersection. It's both a hub for opportunity, creativity, secular practices, and at the same time, a place where the pressure of global overproduction becomes very visible. All right, let's have a quick break with another poll. In terms of what message do you think this artwork is communicating? This artwork came on quite a few months ago, and it was by Emmanuel Morelli, came on social media. It was produced by AI, so there's not an actual picture or artwork. So, and it stirred up a lot of conversation on social media. But let's just what message do you think this artwork is communicating?
I can see responses are coming through. We'll give it a few more seconds.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you can see the results, but
No, I can't.
okay, if you're ready, I can end the poll and share the results.
Okay.
Yeah. I have shared the results, Judith. I'm not sure if you can view
See
it.
it? No, I can see it. I'm just seeing my screen. I was able to
Yeah,
see the first one.
okay. Um, So we have most of the responses to all of the above, although there are a
Okay.
few responses to the hidden waste behind
Yeah.
fast fashion.
Yeah.
That's 28% of the audience responded to that, and we have 20% of the audience responding to the
Mm.
contrast between fashion, marketing, and reality.
Yeah.
And 12% vote to the environmental cost of cheap clothing. But 40%, which is majority of them, have selected all of the above.
All the above. Yeah. So it is all the above. So this artwork, captures a powerful contrast, and the image of fashion we saw that that is often sold to us. Um, the reality of what happens to many of these garments after they're discarded. So, one side we see the polished, curated world of fashion, the beauty, the aspiration, the identity. But on the other side, we see the accumulation of clothing that is waste and stripped of value. It's just piled up and often forgotten. But just to ask, you can just drop it in a comment section. When you take a really good look at this photo, how does it make you feel? Like just in one word, describe how it makes you feel. Just taking a look at it, we can drop some of just how that makes us feel. Describe it in just one word. And if you could share some of the
Yes,
responses.
yes. There are quite a few of them coming through. Awareness, feeling bad, curious, angry, aware,
Okay.
worrying,
Mm. Yeah.
horrible. There's also exploitation that has come through.
Mm.
Yep,
Yeah. So
guilty,
yeah.
unsustainable.
Mm.
Thank you so much for sharing your one word in the chat box.
Thank you. So so yeah, thank you for sharing and for participating. But what's interesting is that many of the words we tend to see or we're using currently reflects often reflects the tension between what we expect um, and what actually happens, and what is happening. So, excuse me. So this image reminds us that behind the aesthetics of fashion lies a much more complex system, and one that produces significant amount of waste, often far removed from the places where clothes are designed and marketed and even purchased. And for many of us, that part of the story is largely invincible to us. So it leads me to my question that I've asked: who bears the cost of our clothes? And it so we asked the question, and this is it's it's quite layered because there is not one single person who bears cost in the chain of what the system looks like. So the cost is layered, it's also shifted, and often away from the points of consumption, as mentioned earlier, to places further down the chain. So as the level of market traders up, so at the level of the market in terms of fundamental markets, we have traders absorbing a significant share of financial risk, and they invest in bales of clothing without certainty of quality. And when items cannot be sold, the loss is theirs to bear. And there is no refund system, no guarantee system, just the hope that enough of what is inside can be sold to recover their investment. So beyond the market, we have communities bearing the cost. So the image you see is quite a lot of textile waste. This is the beach, at the beach of one of the towns at the coastlines of Ghana called Jamestown. And it has a mix. So we have, but then you can see the textile waste, which it just goes deep into the soil, so stuck. We also see it going into the ocean, where we have a lot of, ocean waste. And it's known that the fashion industry contributes up to about 35% of ocean waste. And if you know this, then we understand that in the in the how do you call it, the food chain, where we eat fishes ourselves, this microplastic pollution ends up in fishes and then ends up back on our plate as a meal for ourselves. So what we give to the environment gets back to us if we don't, just in a sense, just if I make any sense with that. And beyond just the market, we have the communities bearing environmental costs when garments are not sellable and do not simply disappear, because if if up to 60% of fabrics now are made of synthetic fibers, and it takes about 200 years for them to decompose, because they don't, and even at that stage it doesn't really break down. So it's just doesn't disappear, it just doesn't go away, it's still in the environment. And so then there's also the local system, municipal authorities, and informal waste networks, which are left to manage the increasing waste network, which are left to manage the increasing volumes of textile waste, often without the infrastructure and the resource or the policy to support the required to do, and also the support required to do this efficiently. And one of the things and the arguments that comes up a lot in Ghana's um, conversation around waste, textile waste, is the fact that we do not have the infrastructure. We lack infrastructure when it comes to our waste system. And there's the truth to that. But then we often forget to look at the whole picture, that this is a global system problem. And we're looking at how global systems are interacting with local capacity. No matter how much efficient the waste system of a local capacity is, it can never absorb what global consumers produce. It never is. That's not realistic in no sense at all. So sometimes I try to come in and I say it's better to look at it from a more systemic point of view, and then because we cannot say secondhand or resale and all of that. Yeah, they can absorb some of the excess, but we should still go back to the underlying problem, which is overproduction and overconsumption. And we also see that there's also this um the economic value is largely captured upstream. And that's also one of the points in production. We see it in production, in branding, in marketing, in retail. But then the risk and the burden is pushed downstream to people who are way down the chain, like traders, communities, and local environments. So when we talk about circular economy, there are so many different conversations revolve when we talk about, I don't know how I'm doing for time. Let me just, oh wow, I have to rush. So we talk about circular economy sometimes. What circular economy looks like in the global north is not what it often looks like in the global south. We have formal recycling systems, resale platforms, but when it comes to the global south, places like Ghana, we have limited waste infrastructure, communities trying to manage the excess, and we have hundreds of thousands of people living with this waste. But then we come to the everyday circularity, and this is very key because Ghana is often presented in the media as a place of where the world's clothing waste ends up. And I feel like images of overflowing like markets, yeah, there's a truth to that, but then there is also the other part of the story that is often not projected in the media and is often missing in the narrative is the extent of the circularity that is already deeply embedded in our everyday life. And but then this is not just a story of waste, it's a story of resourcefulness. So we have different forms of repairs, alterations, resale, upcycling. So we have even community um, a lot of them women who go about in the communities. And I actually engage these services a lot to repair my pieces of clothing. We have market people doing it. We have what we call the Bruniwawo Festival by the All Foundation that is celebrating the upcycling, creativity, engaging young people to do a lot of work in that. And we see a lot of these informal ways um, of secularity that has already existed way before any secularity conversation started like 20 years ago. So we have this that happens at the local level, and then we have at institutional levels like the All Foundation, who is working closely with traders in Kantamanto market while also advocating for accountability in the global fashion system. We have Kokrobite Institute, which is combining sustainable design education with creative reuse of materials. We have landfills, so landmarks that I'm doing research work with, where we're exploring ways of community, where communities can transform the waste into spaces of innovation or something more better to turn the waste into some form of value. And we have the revival as well, which is also one of fantastic one as well. You can look at this up and just follow the work. But as a form of conclusion, if we are to meaningfully address the challenges we've discussed today, then the three things need to shift, in my opinion. So first, overproduction must reduce. The current scale of fashion production far exceeds what the planet and existing systems can absorb. Research has shown that we have enough clothes to sustain us for 5 to 6 generations, and that tells you a lot that the massiveness or the extent to which we are overproducing. And secondly, responsibility must be shared. The burden of managing textile waste cannot continue to fall disappropriately on people down the chain. And also, thirdly, that support systems must be put in place. Many of the practices described as secular, already exist, particularly in places like Ghana. But then how do we amplify such or recognize them or invest into what they are and integrate them into broader systems? And so if they are to be sustained and to be scaled, we need to support secular systems. So, I mean, this is not just a technical challenge. I think it is a question of fairness about when it comes to cost, who bears it. And the question is not only who bears the cost of our clothes, but how we redesign the system so that the value and responsibility and the impact are equitably shared across the value chain. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Judith. There are a few questions already coming through, but that was a brilliant presentation.
Thank you.
Very interesting insights into your research and your work, especially in terms of the country context that you have provided. Um, Again, just letting the audience know to please share your questions in the chat box for the time being, and we will do our best to raise the questions from the chat box. Um, I also want to acknowledge the questions that we have received in advance via the registration form. And Judith, if you're ready, maybe we can start off with addressing some of those questions, and then we can move to the ones in the chat box.
Okay.
Also, as you can see, there are a lot of great reactions coming through on the screen. So
Unfortunately, I can't see it.
well done on the presentation. Really positive feedback so far.
That's
Um,
good.
Great. So the first question is, how can Ghana's textile clusters turn post-consumer and factory waste into funded, market-ready ventures? What mix of policy incentives, community-based collection models, or maybe low-tech upcycling entrepreneurship would effectively move waste from landfill to revenue stream?
Okay. So this is a really important question, and I cannot answer it fully because this is a whole even research area on its own. But then it's really important question because it shifts the conversation from waste to value creation, which is something that even the organization I work with, Landfills to Landmark, is trying um, to do. So in Ghanaian context, the opportunity lies in recognizing that the raw materials already exist in the form of it being both being like the post-consumer waste and also from the imports that we get and the pre-consumer waste from what we get from our local productions. So the challenge is how to organize that material into systems that are already reliable, can be scaled, and also made ready to be invested into. And I think one key starting point is community-based collection and sorting systems. We have some organizations doing that, but it's at a very small level and scale. Much of the waste we see today is fragmented. It sits in markets, it sits in homes, it sits um, in informal disposable sites. So structuring collection through cooperative trader networks, excuse me, or local enterprises can help aggregate the market level into a way that makes them, you know, usable or more of like raw materials for production. And alongside that, there is also a strong potential in low-tech upcycling and remanufacturing models. In many ways, these already exist, but we don't have them so much in terms of technology or the advanced technologies in Ghana. But then we have tailors, we have designers, we have artisans who are constantly transforming garments into something great. And the next step is to be able to support these actors to move from, small scale activity into more structured ventures. And where we have, training systems for young people. And I think Revival, you can check them up. There is an organization called The Revival in Ghana who is doing so much work in this area. But overall, I think it's about connecting three things, and I think it's more about the material supply, entrepreneurial capacity, and enabling policy. There's currently no policy that specifically targets this in Ghana. Policies are shifting globally, like Europe and the UK, but then in terms of it counting or having effect beyond their region is also a question now, because EPL schemes are just mainly, bounded by their region and by their nation. In terms of geography, they don't go beyond their region. So how we are able to incorporate all these to be able to make the system um, ultimately, better, to be able to know that upstream complications or upstream consumer behavior and its related effects in downstream has laws that guide or enforce, responsibility. Thank you.
That's a very great response. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Just looking at the questions that are coming through, based on your research so far, demographically, which group of people are the largest contributors of clothes waste according to your findings?
Which people are the largest?
Which group of people demographically? Maybe
Global North.
global
Global
north,
North.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
not mainly clothes come from the UK.
Mm,
A significant portion of the clothes that arrive in the second-hand trade come from UK, Europe, and then China. So, but then a significant portion comes from the United Kingdom. And so we that is largely, in terms of when we say global north,
mm.
is mainly global north consumers. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question, you have already touched upon this very lightly in your in the response to the first question.
Yeah.
But so far, did you how has your um, maybe status, what's your status on sensitizing governments to craft policies and enact them in their parliaments to manage cloth waste? I know you've mentioned that in Ghana it's still
Yeah.
there are no policies yet.
Yeah.
But how
For
so
textiles.
far,
Yeah.
what has your work led to, or what's your research been around in this area?
Yeah. So currently, there is policy targeted at plastics, but
Mm,
not textiles in particular. But then we see policy shifting from in terms of Europe and the new policy for product producers not to destroy their dead stock, and also in terms of being responsible for the end product of the waste. And policies like this have, some sort of and would have ripple effect on Ghana, because we are down the chain, and this would, yeah, it would help, the trade in terms of in, including quality products and all of that. But then, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have policies that is specifically targeted at textiles. Yes, in a couple of years, I see it happening. I'm hopeful about it, and especially because I'm seeing a shift in Europe, and also currently UK has developed. There have been conversations, and there's been some sort of draft made in that regard. So because a lot of our imports come from global north, and a lot of, especially because we're also involved in second-hand trade, I can confidently, to an extent, say Ghana would definitely have to be able to, catch up in that. And then Ghana would be able to do this and even help herself, in the sense that we can be able to hold the upstream people more accountable. And then in terms of financing some of the recycling, sorting technologies to be brought to the country to be able to help with the waste system. So I think that would be what I can say to that, if
Mm,
it
mm,
helps. Yeah.
great. You mentioned about, those involved in the waste management or like sorting out the textile waste that comes through and the segregation. Um, Could you shed light on those involved and mention describe their gender and age? Is it more females involved than males? What is the gender dimension? Hopefully, this is not lost on the overall cost of waste management, textile waste.
I know the male is female. It's normally a lot of female young people, and that's a more shift towards the labor part of the conversation, which is a whole conversation on its own in the industry because labor and child exploitation and child labor, all of those have been conversations that have come up. But in Ghana, we have a lot of young people, even the Kayayes are young women who carry the headquarters, what we call the headquarters, who are often the ones that carry these bales and after somebody buys it, them they carry this them and there's a lot of um physical strength you need to be able to carry so many bills or even I don't know exactly the weight of the bill, but then you know, and there's even research on how that is even affecting their spine. I read recently one of a publication on how that system has or KIAs and headquarters experience a lot of their health implications of that. But then a lot of women are involved in the trade. A lot of women are involved, especially the secondhand clothing trade. So in terms of gender, it leans more towards women. I think it's more than 60% of it, but that's not specifically my area, so I wouldn't be able to speak to the very exact numbers, statistics of that. But it's a lot of women doing the job.
Quite interesting. All right, just conscious of time, maybe one more question. Um, how do we strike a balance of innovation and emerging clothing versus reduction or reducing overproduction? Just additional information on this is this may be triggered by businesses trying to stay afloat. The attendee who's mentioned it also is wondering on the revenue losses resulting from the bales, given that these clothes are intended for distribution from the global north to south countries. So perhaps more strategies are aimed at redistribution than trading of these clothes items. So what are your thoughts on this?
More on redistribute. It's what people call waste colonialism. I think that's what the person's probably driving at. But that's been one of the conversations by the NGO that works primarily on this topic in Ghana called the All Foundation. And it's not so much about, yes, there's the trade aspect of it, which is genuinely to help clothes recirculate in the system, but then it's also let's just face it, it's just global north shifting waste across the border. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's convenient, and that's the reality of what a system is. And this is what it has been for decades, but I see that there is going to be a shift soon, especially considering what the EPR schemes are, vouching for and pushing for. In I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, we would see a drastic shift. And especially because a lot of these clothes are packed in bales and they're not packed here in Ghana, they are packed in the global north countries where it normally goes through it goes through different, so even with the secondhand trading, it doesn't just come from like one country and it just enters the country. It goes through different sorts. It goes through different European countries. It goes through different phases, and then it's like more like the surplus part of it where it fits global south, then it comes in. And there's even the question of, how how do you put it? I don't have the word for it, but then um dignity, I think that would probably be the word I use for it. But then yes, that is the trade part of it, which is genuine, which people are truly living, use this as source of living. But then there is the other side of it, because in my work, we came across a truckload of um underwears which
Mm.
were stained. Who would wear them? Nobody in Ghana would wear them. They are human beings. You get me? So, given that, and we know very well that yes, we have local government having a hand to play, because local government also allows these things to happen. But also, why would someone ship a whole container of underwears that are stained, that nobody would wear, that is not fitting to any human to wear? So we 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 have that side, and they sit side by side, and that's the reality of it. Thank you. I think that's where I'll end it.
Thank you so much. And we are right on time to end the
Okay.
webinar, to end the Q&A session, sorry.
Okay.
Um, if we can just move to the next slide, please.
Okay. I'll just do that.
Perfect. For anyone who would like to continue this conversation with Judith or would like to get in touch with Judith, please do get in touch with her on LinkedIn. We also
Yeah.
have the QR code on the next slide. Here you go. Please do get in touch with Judith on LinkedIn. She's more than happy to respond to any queries that you might have, or maybe, if you've sent in your queries and we were unable to address it during the webinar, please
Yeah.
do reach out to her. Judith, as she has mentioned earlier in the
Mhm.
webinar, is also looking to connect with the scholars and alumni who have been either conducting research in this area or are working in this area, and would like to um, perhaps connect and discuss and take these discussions further. So please do reach
Yeah.
out to Judith. And with this, we will come to an end of this webinar. Uh, Huge thank you to Judith for delivering this webinar. Um, as part of the CSE Development in Action webinar series, I'm sure all those who have joined us online can have been giving positive feedback about the webinar in the chat box and with your reactions as well. So thank you so much for joining this webinar today, and for Judith for delivering this wonderful presentation on your research and on your work as well. Good luck to you, Judith, for your future endeavors. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Judith, any final words before we end this webinar? Of course, we will have the post-webinar networking session after this. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining in. It's a pleasure. And like Eva said, if you're willing to connect, if you're doing work in this area, believe we need to throw more light and amplify this area of work and research, and it needs it, because it has been trivialized for the longest time, but it needs we need to be able to invest so much into this area and create that awareness, especially in terms of consumer behavior and the waste aspect of it. So I look forward to connecting with everyone who would want to be able to, find synergies in our work, partner, collaborate, and bring and amplify this area of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Um,